Let's start with the quarterbacks, as we always do. Who are we starting that we otherwise might not think we should?
Statistically, it doesn't look like it's a great matchup for Burrow against the Eagles. Now, but Burrow's been hot. 17 plus points in 4 of his last 6 games. When you look at the Eagles, though, who have they played, Lindsay? Deshaun Watson, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones. Not great. Start Joe Burrow. Bo Nix, I've got him in my top 12 this week. The matchup's really good against the Panthers. They just gave up almost 20 points to Marcus Mariota, who's a backup. They've given up 16 plus points to 4 quarterbacks, including 3 who've gone over 19. Bo Nix is in a couple of my starting lineups this week.
Who are we sitting, buddy?
And I am starting him over Dak Prescott, who has not really done well. I mean, he scored fewer than 17 points in all but one game. And the one game where he didn't was that game against Baltimore where he had to throw the ball, I think 51 times. And now he's got the Niners. Now their offense is dinged all over the place, but their defense is not. They've allowed an average of fewer than 15 points per game to quarterbacks. So Dak, to me, is outside of the top 12, outside of the top 15. I would beware Dak. And then Trevor Lawrence. Now his numbers have been somewhat better lately, 17 plus points in 2 of his last 3 games, but he's still averaging fewer than 15 points per game. He's got the Packers this week. Their defense has only allowed one quarterback to beat them for more than 16.4 points, and they've played against Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, and CJ Stroud just last week. So Trevor Lawrence is a fade for me.
Who are we starting at running back?
DeAndre Swift. Get him back into your starting lineup after Chicago's bye, and before that bye, 20 plus points in 3 straight games, which is crazy because in the previous 3 games, he didn't scare double digits. Swift went from being a guy that you were like, oh my God, I got to cut him, to like, holy cow, I got to start him. And the matchup's really good this week against the Commanders. They're giving up 5.2 yards per rush. 5 running backs have beaten them for 14 plus points, including 3 who've gone over 18 and 2 over 20. So Swift's a really good play. Yeah, you could be looking at the same thing for Javonte Williams, too, against the Panthers. You could be looking at a very positive game script for the running backs. He's coming off his best game of the year. You know, a couple of touchdowns, 26 fantasy points. He scored 16 plus in 2 of his last 3. The Panthers defense has allowed 7 running backs to beat them for more than 17 points. Guys, we're in week 8. 7 running backs. Think about that. 5 who've gone over 20. So if Javonte Williams does not put up a big stat line this weekend, something really went wrong.
Who has the opposite of a bump? Who has a tough
a couple running backs you probably have to start, but you don't have to like it. You know, Tony Pollard, who's been good. I mean, he's averaging 14 points per game. Last week, he got game scripted out, even though the matchup was good. And I kind of fear the same thing's going to happen this week with the Lions. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to running backs. And if the Lions are smoking the Titans, they're not going to be able to run the ball, and you're going to see more Tajay Spears. Yeah, when. Basically, is more of the point. And then Nick Chubb, who came back last week. He did have a touchdown, but I mean, 22 yards on 10 carries, not good. When you look at the matchup, now I know the Ravens just gave it up to Rachaad White, but he did a lot of his damage as a receiver, and Nick Chubb is not going to do that. So I would beware Nick Chubb this week. He's a risk-reward flex starter at best.
Right? Wide receivers, who are we starting?
My guy, Jaden Reed. I mean, this is more of like, you know, validation. He had a bad game last week. I know he had a bad game last week, but look at the matchup. Like, if he had a bad matchup, I'd say it, but he's got the Jags. They've given up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and 9 have scored more than 14 points against them, including 4 who did most of their damage out of the slot. Reed is a slot receiver. Keep the faith. Start Jaden Reed. And when I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong. And I was wrong about George Pickens last week. He had a great game. He's got the other New York team this week, the Giants. This is a positive matchup. They've given up the 6th most fantasy points to perimeter receivers. Russell Wilson seems to have a little something going on with George Pickens. Unlike Justin Fields, Russell will actually throw the ball downfield and let George Pickens go up and win those contested catches. I think that's a positive. George Pickens is a wide receiver 2 this week.
Who are we sitting?
Deontay Johnson. And to be quite honest with you, I had him on this list before the announcement came that Bryce Young was going to be the quarterback. That makes it even worse. Deontay Johnson is very hard to start this week. He's dealing with multiple injuries. Oh, by the way, Broncos, all the way Patrick Surtain, assuming he's back this week. And the defense for Denver has given up 1 touchdown and the 3rd fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. So Deontay Johnson, enjoy those fantasy points while you had him with Andy Dalton under center. And then I'm going to go Marvin Harrison Jr. And this is not a rage sit him. I did trade him in a couple of leagues because he's become a headache for me, and I was wrong. I mean, listen, it's a long season. Maybe he'll bounce back, and I hope he does. But Miami's defense has allowed 1 touchdown and the 4th fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. And oh, by the way, Jalen Ramsey. I'm a little worried about Harrison Jr. this week. If you play him, temper your expectation.
What about tight end? Who are we starting?
David Njoku has become now like a virtual must start. Like every week, you're going to have to play him. Last week, 10 catches, 14 targets, 76 yards, a touchdown, 23 fantasy points. And now he's, I think, the number one option in the offense, right? The most reliable option. It's not Judy. I like Cedric Tillman, but it's not him. It's Njoku. The Ravens defense has allowed 5 tight ends to beat them for at least 9.7 points, including 3 who've gone over 15. And remember, last week, Cade Otton had a big game against them. So David Njoku is a really good play this week. And so is Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft didn't have a lot of targets last week, and I didn't love the matchup, but he still found the end zone. This is a good matchup against the Jaguars. They have allowed 4 different tight ends to beat them for 11 plus points. That includes Cole Kmet and Hunter Henry, who I'm going to talk about, who had over 17 against them. I have Tucker Kraft in my top 12 this week at tight end.
All right, dirtbags. We obviously love fantasy football, and there's so many different formats in which you can play fantasy football. I'm sure you guys already know about Prize Picks. Obviously, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. If you are not one of those members yet, though, what are you waiting for? It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is you pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks, Fabs.
And I'm going to help the dirtbags out there for this week. I'm going to go with Joe Mixon to have more than 74.5 rushing yards against the Colts. He's averaging over 100 yards per game on the ground so far this year.
Holy
so I think that one looks good. And then I'm also going to go with Rachaad White to have more than 18.5 receiving yards against Atlanta. Should be a high scoring game. No Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin. So Rachaad White should see plenty of options in the passing game.
All right, we've done half the work for you. Now all you have to do in order to win up to 100 times your money, you just have to get 2 more right. Assuming that those 2 are right. Fingers crossed. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code FANTASYDIRT, and you will get $50 instantly added to your account when you play $5. That's code FANTASYDIRT on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Who are we sitting this week at tight end?
Hunter Henry. I'm not chasing the points, and I know he's had 2 great weeks. 30.2 points in his last 2 games combined. That's pretty damn good. But this guy is like hot one minute and cold the next, and I think he's going to be cold against the Jets. They've given up, let's just say, 7.1 points to only 1 tight end. I mean, they have been phenomenal, and they held Henry to 2.9 points back in week 3. So Hunter Henry needs to find a spot on your bench. And Pat Freiermuth against the other New York team, the G-Men. Now, he was a startable asset. The last couple of weeks, the numbers have not been great. The Giants have allowed 35.1 receiving yards and the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends. In fact, 1 tight end, Lindsay, has beaten them for more than 10.2 points this season. So Freiermuth is going to go away from a fantasy perspective in week 8.